Medieval plague, modern pandemic. Hello, I'm Professor Roger Martinez-Davila from the University of Colorado, and I welcome you to these lectures. Listen now to the words of Boccacio. Let me say then that 1,348 years had passed since the fruitful incarnation of the Son of God, when the deadly plague arrived in the noble city of Florence. Let us reflect on the past to understand today, a view of the medieval Black Death in relationship to the present coronavirus pandemic. Why should we study the medieval Black Death? Because our world has known these horrors before. Just as the Flemish Renaissance painter Peter Bruegel the Elder had demonstrated in his work, The Triumph of Death, disease and the end of life know no social boundaries. This is why the images out of Wuhan, China in December 2019 have been so disturbing. We see countless people, helpless, finding new ways to protect themselves that seem positively medieval. How is it possible in this global modern era that we find ourselves reduced to dust? Just as in the Middle Ages, there is no safe harbor. It is time for some hard questions. The intent of this short series of lectures is to create a place for discussing the medieval Black Death as a way for us, here and now, to examine, understand, and reflect on the present global coronavirus pandemic of 2019 and 2020. We will take good care to pay attention to today's world, to Italy, in January 2020, where everyday people and everyday lives were disrupted. Little did we know that in busy museums like the Uffizi in Florence, we were surrounded by great artworks and a pending pandemic. As a historian of medieval Europe and the Mediterranean world, I will share with you the words of our forefathers and mothers, their bequeathed treasury of knowledge and emotions. We will encounter the materiality of their lives, objects in art and architecture, as well as their bodies that now rest lifeless, nameless, in collective graves. We will commune with the dead to honor their loss and sacrifice. We will commune with the dead to better understand that our eternal human family is not alone at this time of despair, panic, and uncertainty. I won't mislead you. This is a painful time and a painful history. I think about my friends and colleagues back in Madrid, Spain, and Barcelona, the vivid times and lives that we enjoyed there from 2015 to 2018. Its amazing Gran Via in Madrid, and just the brilliant interconnectedness of life. It's a shocking thought to think that the metro station at Seoul is now empty, that all these people are sheltering in place at home, that just like this train, it leaves and now it's empty. That's why we look to history. That's why we try to appreciate from history, how are all these deaths? How do we make sense of them? And how did our ancestors deal with this? How did they resist? And how did they find a way to say thanks? Our first task will be to find the origins of the Black Death, to travel back to the 14th century, to locate its origin in the Tibet Plateau in China, and how it traveled along the Silk Road and found its way by 1347 into Constantinople, to Asia Minor, into Egypt, and how it climbed up the Italian Peninsula by 1347, Florence, Iberia, France, all were impacted, and even England by 1348. Our first task will be to examine the Decameron by Boccacio, and to examine this text as a way to feel for what were people thinking about at the time. How did they experience the initial arrival of the plague? But more importantly, how did society adjust? How did it restructure itself? How did they explore new ideas and give birth to the Renaissance? That is what is so important about this time period, the Middle Ages, and our time period, how they took loss of life and created something new. And we'll be asking and examining a number of questions that range a whole perspective. To focus our attention and enhance our ability to comprehend the past and present, we will march through 10 fundamental issues pertaining to culture, religion, economics, politics, science, and the natural world. Let us frame them as questions for investigation. 1. What was the Black Death, and what were the immediate societal impacts of the plague from 1347 to 1353? 2. Why did medieval peoples believe the Black Death had come to visit them? How did religion and magic shape perspectives on the causes of the plague and how to confront the beast? 3. As the Black Death withered humanity's interconnectedness, how and why did human relationships transform within cultures and in between cultural groups? 4. How did plague initially decimate medieval trade and the ability to provide for one's family? In what ways did economies adapt and remake themselves? 5. In what manner were cities and human population centers reshaped by the pandemic? 6. How was law and order impacted by plague, and who suffered the wrath of its fragmentation and breakdown? 7. To what extent did medical and scientific knowledge about the natural world and disease prepare communities for the challenges of the Black Death? 8. How did the pandemic change social status relations between nobles and commoners and demand the reordering of society? 9. What motifs and messages did medieval peoples communicate via art, architecture, and music in response to the Black Death? And 10. When did societies begin to recover from the medieval pandemic, and how did they emerge as reborn and transmuted communities? What is quite shocking is during and after the medieval Black Death, as societies began to rebound and recover from its devastation, there was an explosion of cultural and intellectual developments. The Italian Renaissance, with its revival of ancient knowledge alongside of new innovations, brought into existence humanism, a celebratory exploration of the liberal arts, grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, and philosophy, coupled with advances in natural sciences, astronomy, architecture, and art. It was a new age that was only made possible due to the impact of the medieval plague. This is our call to arms, to examine, to understand, to reflect, so that we may weather the present crisis together and resurrect the human spirit. Thank you for joining me for this exploration and this discussion. We'll see you next week.